All right, folks, what's going on? Tonight, we're going to be talking about interviewing again. So, we'll get a bit of a new perspective on things. It's really nice that a lot of you guys are, professionals in different areas, so you can sort of corroborate and compare contrast experiences with the medical realm, because the medical realm is, in fact, what we'll be focusing on tonight, in case that wasn't obvious. As many of you probably already know, I'm Milkman Al. I am an anesthesiologist and have been for working on 6 years now. First off, the first thing that I would like to do is shout out my Twitch community. You guys are awesome. So in case you don't know, I stream regularly on Wednesdays and Sundays. It's always a medical AMA. You are encouraged and welcome to come by and ask any questions that you have. You do not have to wait for these sessions. You can DM me anytime. I will be happy to talk with you and answer whatever questions you have. But yeah, everybody has been very supportive, not only of me, but each other. And I think that you will find that I have a whole bunch of we have a bunch of people with different backgrounds. Like we have Serial Killer, who's been very successful in the tech sector. Several people who are non-traditional students. They have a lot of really interesting perspectives. And they will be more than willing to help you out as well. So please drop by. That would be fantastic. If you missed it, we did an interview session like this a couple months ago, kind of before the med school and residency season started. So things have changed a little bit, right? So we're kind of in the middle of both of those seasons. You know, having had some interviews under your belt, I encourage those of you who have interviewed to, pipe up and ask questions and contribute as you feel you can. Some basics of interviewing, right? This is interviewing 101 right now. First is appearance matters, okay? As nice as it would be if everyone was evaluated purely on their merits and their experiences and how they present themselves, that just is not the case. It's not human nature. It matters that you are, clean, presentable, dressed formally. Usually, formal dress means a suit, but that can also mean military dress, something like cultural. I'm not worldly enough to know what that may be, but, as long as it's formal, and that's perfectly acceptable. One thing that I always tell people is you have to keep in mind that medicine in particular, and especially other high-level jobs, are essentially run by conservative old white guys, right? So view anything that you do through the prism that they're going to have. And yes, I'm stereotyping, of course, but that's pretty much how it is. And you're not going to go wrong making that assumption and operating under it. Oh, as a pharmacist I used to work with when I was a pharmacy tech, he always used to tell me, if you don't care enough to wear a suit, you don't care enough to get the job. So the next thing is a little bit Sun Tzu. Know thine enemy, right? So know the school or job that you're applying to. Know everything about them that you can. Read their websites, read all their mailers and the current events that are going on at the school or the program. Just get all of the information that you can. That's just smart interviewing. It gives you discussion topics. It gives you fuel for conversation. You don't want to let the conversation stall and be awkward if you can avoid it at all. By the same vein, know yourself, right? You have to expect certain questions like, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to go to this school? Those are basics that if you can't answer those questions, you're screwed. There's no reason that you should not be able to answer those questions impactfully. They're coming, so prepare answers for them. And you don't want to sound scripted, of course, but you have to have some sort of idea of what you're going to say for those things, because you will get asked all of those questions basically in every single interview. And if you can't talk about yourself, what are you going to talk about? If you can get information about who is going to be interviewing you, that is also very useful, because you can learn about your interviewers personally. In keeping with the old white guy conservative thing, some people may not appreciate that, so you might not be super forward with exactly how much you've been able to internet troll about these people. Maybe read the room on that one. But again, knowing who you're up against and what their interests are, what their fields are, and those sorts of things are very helpful to you. So one thing that's very a very interesting difference between this talk and the one that we did previously is that lots of you have already had interviews, right? Many of you already have acceptances, so congratulations for both of those things. And if you are one of the lucky ones to have, that is nothing but good for you. Because one, you can de-stress during your interview because you know you're going somewhere. At the very, like, even if you just totally bomb and say something ridiculous, you offend your interviewers, and, you know, they kick you out of the interview on the spot, like, you still have an acceptance and you're going somewhere. So no big deal, right? The other thing is that if you get another acceptance, you can potentially leverage them against each other. Definitely can't do that, or shouldn't do that, until you have those acceptances, because it is definitely a seller's market. You're not in the driver's seat, even if you have an acceptance somewhere. Programs can tell you whatever they want. You know, they may say, well, we're definitely going to accept you, and we think you're a very strong candidate. Well, talk is cheap. Until you get that acceptance letter, that doesn't mean anything. Residency, same way. Or, you know, business interviews, same way. Until there's an offer on the table, you know, it doesn't matter. You basically can't bully these programs because they have all the power. But once you have those acceptances, then you can work with it. Maybe you can get some money out of them. Maybe, you know, you can get some other perks or whatever. Like if you're in a position for a scholarship, that's pretty cool. And you can kind of angle that way during the interview and sort of plant that seed. And then if they accept you, you're good to go. But at the very least, it takes the pressure off, which is awesome for most people. Because interviewing sucks, right? It's a very high stress, high pressure environment. And are they still doing Zoom interviews? I actually have a question for you guys. Are they doing Zoom interviews now still, or is it like in person? Because that sort of throws a wrench into things, but actually is to your advantage in a lot of ways. Because one, you don't have to travel. Two, you know, you can be more comfortable. Basically, it's not quite as on the spot and intimidating. And they offer in person if you want it. Yeah, so that's an interesting point. So if you are very good at interviewing, like if you're a really personable type and can really glad hand people, interviewing in person is going to be very much to your advantage. You know, I understand that sometimes that isn't a possibility, right? Like it might just not work with your schedule, you know, you might not be able to afford it, whatever. So Zoom is much more palatable because travel is expensive, especially these days. But yeah, if you can like show up and shake somebody's hand and then promptly alcohol it afterwards because we're in a pandemic, then you can really get yourself some points. Any regrets? Something that I wish I did when I interviewed. I kind of wish that I had been a little bit more forward with the questions that I'd ask, especially in residency. Because in residency, I was very qualified. Or for residency interviews, I was very qualified. And I wish that I had known better questions to ask. If you can find out, like maybe from older students or something, what you should be asking residencies, which in my opinion is work hours, call burden, work environment, like how are the attendings, how do the other residents treat each other, you know, are you doing high level work, are you, you know, picking up for mid-levels where they leave off. Those are all very important things that I honestly had no idea to even ask beforehand. But yeah, I definitely suggest, especially if you're in that already have an acceptance camp or already have an offer camp, like be bold, you know, ask tough questions. If nothing else, that shows that you're engaged and you care. If somebody asked me that as an interviewer, something like kind of hard hitting, I might be kind of like, oh, well, that's intense. But you know, it shows that you're thinking about what you're doing. It shows you care and that you've like done your research, and you know, you give them enough of a shit to have done that, to put the time into it, and you're not just sort of there answering their weird ass, you know, pre-prepared questions. So that brings up an interesting point. So all interviewers are different, right? I prefer a no bullshit. I'm very friendly when I interview, but like I'm always evaluating you. That's the whole point, right? That's the whole point. So I'm not gonna like bust your balls or anything, but if somebody is there and they're like, hey, I need to know this information about your program. You know, what is the call burden? Do you have a good working environment? You know, to be fair, you might not get a straight answer to that. If you're in a group interview, especially, like somebody might have like fear of like retaliation, essentially, from the staff or from their coworkers, or who knows. But it's possible that you will not get a straight answer. However, they will probably respect you for asking those questions. Can you tell me briefly about the tell me about yourself question? How would I answer it? Can I give an example response? Sure. Here's a great example. This is my about me answer, right? Anytime that somebody asks you to describe yourself, and that is a very general thing, like a resume or an about me section, or what are your hobbies, or tell me about yourself. These are all things that are essentially asking you for a very dense amount of information in a short time, right? So if you submitted a resume that's longer than one page, it's going in the trash unless that first page absolutely kicks ass. You need to deliver hard-hitting, good, useful, interesting information quickly. So I'm not saying that I am an exemplar of being able to do that, but this is what I said for my Twitch, about me. I said, hello, my name's Alex. I'm a dad, anesthesiologist, longtime gamer, right? So those are the things that are most relevant to my stream, right? Because I'm a dad. Everybody sees pictures of my kid all the time doing ridiculous crap. I'm an anesthesiologist. Obviously, I'm here talking about medicine, and I'm a longtime gamer. I game all the time on my stream. So that's, you know immediately what you're getting. I introduce myself by name because I want this to be personal. And I want everybody to be involved and think of me as just part of the community, not like a leader or somebody different. So it seems like just a simple sentence, but there's a lot going on there, right? This is very premeditated, and it's just hard hitting, right? Everything that you need to know, if you think about it, for my stream is right there. I play RPGs, Path of Exile, Last Epoch at the moment, so you know what games to expect. I'm hoping to create a relaxed community of gamers while also dishing out medical knowledge and pertaining to things that I do at work. So I'm just sort of fleshing out that initial sentence, right? This is essentially like my cover letter. Basically, you talk about the things that define you, right? If you are super into brewing beer, I don't know, talk about that. You're like, I do this. I really like brewing beer. I have recently made an imperial stout, and it's amazing. In my other time, I do, I jog, I exercise a lot, or whatever. Pick a couple things that are really, really important to your persona and go with it. So can I start off this question with your hobbies for med school interview? Absolutely. Yeah, why would you not? If those take up your time and that's something that you find, defining of you and very important in your life, then talk about it. Because the things that you are able to talk about and you're passionate about will make you interview better. Because even if the people that you're talking to don't have any idea about brewing beer, if you can talk about it and talk to them about it and sort of lead them through without sounding like you're just saying words, then you're golden, man. They will be interested, and they'll think that you are an interesting person, and they will be engaged. What are red flags that you feel can come up during an interview? First off, nervousness is not one. Everybody is nervous, right? Again, it's a very high pressure situation. Your interviewers know that you are totally at their mercy. It's expected that people will be nervous, so don't worry about that. If you are falling apart nervous, that might not be good. But if you're just kind of even shaky or sort of unsure of yourself, it's fine, man. It's fine, and you'll get in the groove. And it's okay. Everybody expects that. If you are obviously unprepared, if they ask you, tell me about yourself, and you can't come up with anything, you have to know about yourself. You have to be able to do that because it's you. If you can't talk about you, who is going to be able to talk about you? If you are obviously unprepared for gimme questions, that's a big one. Don't ever say anything unwarranted and negative. That's a terrible idea. So keep it positive, if at all possible. I would be very hesitant about discussing hot button topics or politics or religion or anything like that. You're playing with fire. That's not necessarily wrong, but man, you can burn yourself real bad if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person. Other things, promptness. This sort of goes along with the Zoom thing. To me, if you're late to an interview, you don't give a shit. I mean, there's extenuating circumstances, if you get lost, if your plane's delayed or whatever, that's a trick, right? You have to be able to talk about something very briefly and introduce this subject. For me, I'm yeah, I'm a dad and an anesthesiologist, but I'm just gonna leave it at that. And if somebody's like, oh, that's cool, you're an anesthesiologist, well, what's that like? And then that's your key to talk more about it, right? They're interested, you hooked them. But if you just kind of like start droning on, then you lost them. You know, you lost them before you even started. What are some things that make you go, I want to accept this person during or after an interview? So straightforwardness and confidence, being able to answer a question thoughtfully. A lot of the times people will ask questions deliberately that you don't know the answer to, and that's sort of taken to the extreme by like I've forgotten what they're called, but the interview situations that are like scripted and ask you like ethical questions and stuff. I think that's a piss poor way of interviewing people, because you're not learning about them. You know, I don't care what you're gonna do when some kid, you know, gets paralyzed and his parents don't want him to be intubated, but he's gonna be not paralyzed in 4 hours. You know, so you have to choose whether he lives or dies. Like, that's a question I got asked in an anesthesiology residency interview. I'm like, what does that tell you about me? It tells you nothing about me at all. So, like, my answer to an ethical question, you know, unless you're like, fuck the kid, kill them all, like, that's a problem. But, you know, if you try to come up with a reasonable answer to it, that's just like, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything at all. If you can just like speak about yourself in a thoughtful manner, you can come up with a reasonable response to all of the things that they ask. That's a huge win. You know, if I just like straight up got along with a person, that's an intangible. If I just felt like the person would be a good fit, then that's a huge plus in my mind. If you get an interview, you are presumed to be qualified. Some places even go as far as totally disregarding your like everything except the interview after you get an interview. So like everybody is on an equal playing field, and then you go and interview and they judge you by that alone. If you walk in that door as an interviewee, you stand just as good of a chance as anybody else at getting in, because you've already made that cut. They think that you are good enough to go to their school. And that's really important to remember. You're not trying to like build yourself up or dig out of a hole, because you've already, there's no hole. There's no hole. They've already decided that you are good to go. So yeah, to put a bit of a finer point on my last response about just liking a person. So medicine is a very high intensity profession, right? We've gone over that. If you can be cool and collected and have a reasonable conversation when you're getting pounded in an interview, that's a huge plus. You know, even if you start out nervous and you kind of like gather your wits, like that says that you perform well under pressure. It says that you're an easy person to get along with even when you're stressed out, which is a huge plus, because especially like the further along you get, the more likely you are to be working with your interviewers, you know, and that is true of any job. That's what I want in a partner. I want somebody who's chill under fire. I want somebody who's personable, even when they're, you know, getting reamed. Like, that's awesome. Those are great properties to have, especially in somewhere, you know, where you're literally dealing with people's lives. What was the hardest question I've been asked in an interview? The hardest to answer, like, from an emotional standpoint was, what do I regret in my life? Which I actually struggled with, to be honest. I couldn't think of a good answer, and then I realized it was basically not seeing my grade school math teacher, who was, like, really influential in my life and took really good care of me. Not seeing her before she died of cancer. And I was kind of like getting choked up in the interview, and I was like, oh shit, like, hold it together, Alex. Could I have answered that difficult question with not pursuing pre-med when I first got to college? Yeah, that's reasonable, but that's kind of a weak regret, to be honest. You know, most people have some sort of like meaningful and impactful thing that's happened to them in their lives. You know, to me, what that would say is that you're like, you've got tunnel vision. You know, there maybe isn't a whole lot to you other than this medicine thing, which might be true and might not be necessarily all that bad, but that's still something that you're telling your interviewer, whether you're meaning to or not. So that's the challenging part, right? Is like not sort of giving these people undesirable subtext. So interviewing is definitely a skill, and it takes practice and it takes a lot of thought. So I 100% recommend getting involved with practice interviews. Academic institutions will have simulated interviews for you to do. This is obviously focused on med school and residency and stuff, but the interviews are really not that much different for any other job. So anybody who's willing to like give you a practice interview, like even if it's like a friend, family member, whatever, like just have them ask you these questions. You know, do the like, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to go to this school? you know, what's something you regret? What's your biggest strength? What's your biggest weakness? Like, just have them ask you those things and like talk through it with you, and you know, ask them what they think about your response. I mean, it's easy, right? That takes very little time. Even though these people aren't presumably, you know, skilled interviewers, they'll still be able to give you an impression of what you said. You know, they're still people, and they can tell you like, oh, well, that was a really shitty answer, man, or like, wow, you answered that very like directly and thoughtfully, and that was good. You know, keep those elements in your response. One thing that you should really watch out for is don't tell people you're a bad test taker. Like, even if you feel like that's true, what that says is I am bad under pressure. Like, if you have an MCAT score or something that's, you know, not congruent with your grades, like maybe you have a 50th percentile MCAT score and like a 4.0 or something. I don't know. I'm just making up numbers, but don't do that. That is a huge tell. Come up with something else, because you don't want to tell people who are hiring you for a high pressure profession that you are bad under pressure. That does not look good. At what point in the cycle, when you don't have a certain number of interviews, should you start thinking about reapplying? You should start thinking about contingency plans when you apply to med school. That is another gimme question that you will almost always be asked. What if you don't get into med school? I, unfortunately, did not have a good answer to that. I think I told them that I would like maybe look into nursing and reapply, which is, in retrospect, is real stupid. The real answer was, I'm going to see what my physics degree can do for me. What if you already have acceptances? How would you answer that? I would tell them I have acceptances. I'd be straightforward with them. Be humble about it. Just be like, you know, well, I'm fortunate enough to already have acceptances, so I don't have to worry about that. But, you know, you can say, if I hadn't gotten in, this is what I would have done. You know, to not just like totally shut that down, and, you know, show them that you've thought about it, that you have a contingency plan. This is Cockroach Princess in Twitch. He's one of the regulars who is in fact already accepted to med school, so round of applause for him. Anyway, says, I have an interview tomorrow and I'm still struggling with the tell me about yourself question. I still don't know what I want to say about yourself. Okay, well, what are things that you enjoy? What are cool things about you? How do you view yourself? You like video games, watching Twitch streams, being outdoors? Yeah. Outdoors is good. Sure. Well, if you don't think it's interesting, then it's not going to be interesting. I guarantee it. But if you're interested in it, tell them what you're interested in. You know? I mean, so outdoors, based on what you just listed there, you know, there's several things there, like you fishing, camping, hiking. Like, hey, I like going outdoors. I like fishing, doing this type of fishing. Like if it's fly fishing or something, like those are all interesting hobbies that a lot of people can relate to. Like, they probably don't know much about Twitch streams, and you can, like, soften that blow and be like, oh, I'm a huge nerd. I like video games. You know, I'm a gamer, and I, like, you know, like to watch other games and all that stuff. And they'll, you know, probably just be like, yeah, okay, youngins, and move on. But the outdoorsmanship stuff, like, that's universal, man. Like, everybody can relate to that. Yeah, so all of these things, like, you know, tell a quick little anecdote. Like, how did you become, like, an outdoorsman? What got you started there? And, like, it's got to be quick. You know, a couple sentences, but then that'll totally lead them into whatever. You know, you don't have to like tell them your life story. Just tell them a couple quick hitters and get them engaged. A large portion of interviews are reading the room and making guiding conversations that benefit all parties. 100% agree with that, my man. And that's why I was recommending, you know, if you're not good with interviews, like do some mock interviews, especially with like your college. Like the interviews with like family and friends will be less useful and for that sort of skill. If you do it with people you don't know, they'll be able to give you feedback on that a little bit more usefully. My story gives you confidence? It should not. It should not at all. I got in by the skin of my teeth and like really just caught a massive break. The interview saved me, man. Like I knew that if I could go and just like talk with somebody that I would be in really good shape, and that was the case. So I sort of alluded to this fact earlier, but everything subjective is basically trash unless it's not. So like your resume, if it's more than one page, it's trash. If, you know, you send somebody an email, it's trash. If, you know, all of your personal statement, trash. Like, unless you're like top 5% or bottom 5%, nobody gives a crap, right? It's all just like, just extra nonsense. The same can be said of writing thank you letters to your interviewers. But dude, do it. It is such a low effort thing to do. And there's nothing but upside to doing that, right? So yeah, 90% chance that that email just gets insta deleted. So what? If one person reads it and they're like, oh yeah, I remember this guy. He was really cool. We talked about hiking, you know, cool, you win. You know, you made a connection with that person who is, you know, presumably going to advocate for you. You're like, oh, this is really thoughtful that they took the time to do this. Thank you notes, make them short, okay? Anything longer than like 2 or 3 sentences, again, trash. Nobody's going to read any of that. So short, sweet, you know, if there was something memorable about your interview, mention it. You know, so they can remember you, so they can identify you. That's super important. Also, correspond with the admissions committee, or the admissions office. Like, that's a huge in. You know, be very, very nice to those people because they're the ones handling your file. You know, if you're in with them, like, they're part of the operation too. And if you have super positive interactions with those people, they can be like, hey, you know what? This guy, he seems cool. He's all right. Like, you can, there's one thing that I did, which, I don't know, might be a little forward for a lot of places, but Arkansas actually like offered it, which is why I took advantage. Anyway, I talked with the admissions team about what was wrong with my application, even though it's fucking obvious I had a 3.1 GPA, right? Like, clearly that's what's holding me up. I don't need to talk to the admissions director to know that, but I wanted to get FaceTime, right? That's the whole point, is you just make yourself known. Again, there is a game to play here. And if you can make yourself stand out in a positive fashion, you should do it. And that is one way to do it, is have good interactions with those people, with those officials. So, you know, the game doesn't end just because you're done with your interview. And on a very closely related note, every single person that you meet on your interview day is evaluating you. Okay? Be nice to everyone. Be courteous. Be kind. They are all interviewing you, whether or not they sit on the admissions committee or, you know, what, like, you know, if you're rude to like a housekeeper and they go up to the admissions director and say, that guy was a jerk, you're done. You are 100% done. So yeah, be very thoughtful about how you comport yourself. Oh yeah, and also, one thing that I didn't mention was, another way to get contact with an admissions office is to thank them for inviting you to an interview, right? Send an email back and be like, hey, I'm really excited. Thanks. Is there anything that I need to know? You know, even though you can find all of those things out by yourself, just looking online, because I'm sure that's a, you know, standard rote question, and they may refer you to that. You know, they may say, hey, well, go look at our information online. But, you know, if you send them an email and say you're excited, then you at least have that chance to like open a line of communication, and that they'll be like, oh yeah, you know what, these are the people who will be interviewing you, and you know, this is what you need to do, and blah, blah, blah. Like, all that stuff. That's all important. Do I recommend emailing med schools, asking them to please interview you? If you are particularly interested in them, and, like, the interest is genuine, then yes. Yes, I do. There's no real downside to asking a school to interview you, right? Like, I mean, presumably you don't have an interview there, so the worst that happens is you still don't have an interview there after you talk to them. Yeah, and yeah, you can have a professor write a rec letter. That's a great idea. Yeah, for sure. If you, like, you can get somebody to write an extra rec letter or something that says, hey, he really wants to go here. Heard some schools will go as far to stock social media pages. Yeah, absolutely. Why would they not? They're doing the same things that you do to them, or should do to them. Yeah, I think there's absolutely truth to that. They would be silly not to, honestly. There have been plenty of stories of, like, people getting, you know, expelled from residency or med school or whatever because of things that they posted on social media. That happens all the time. I think less so these days, now that people understand that that's a possibility. But, like, dude, yeah, if you've got anything questionable on your... Well, no, I won't even qualify it. When you're interviewing for med school or residency, just deactivate all your social media. Just turn it off. Or make it private or whatever. Yeah, there's zero benefit to you not doing that. I wouldn't even, like, de-identify yourself. I just totally deactivate it. Make sure that you have questions. Speaking of having questions, make sure you've got some questions for the people who interview you. That is also important. That is another way to show interest in what you're doing and, you know, show that you care and know what you're talking about. Big, like, talking points are things that you find on the school's website. Like I was saying, you should be doing that anyway, like research the school to see what they're, like, super proud of. and put on their front page. So you can ask about those things even if you don't care. Other things to ask about: finances. 100% ask about finances. See if there's any loan forgiveness programs, if there's any, things that you can get involved in as a first year student, or if you're interviewing for residency, see if there's any research programs or something that you can do, if that's your thing. These are all really easy, good questions to ask. So yeah, finance is a big one. Most schools will have some sort of underserved community program. So if you're thinking that you want to go into primary care, and primary care means like family practice, internal medicine, pediatrics, obstetrics, sometimes general surgery. I don't know, there's probably other stuff that I'm not thinking of. But in any event, if you want to do primary care in an underserved area, there are lots and lots and lots of options that many schools provide. So if you're looking to get some loan forgiveness, that is a great thing to ask about. Because everybody's concerned about debt, and rightfully so, because the average med school indebtedness is over $200,000. So that if you aren't concerned about that, you're missing the memo hardcore. And again, the whole point of this is to make it look like you're thoughtful and have made this decision to go to med school very carefully. And if you're asking questions like that, it shows that you get it. Because let's be real, a lot of people apply to med school because their parents want them to, or because they think that that's what they should do. And if you can differentiate yourself from that crowd in any capacity, it's a good idea. I am Milkman Al. It's been a pleasure, guys. Excellent questions. Thank you for participating. I hope you got something out of this. So have a good night, folks, and I will see you on Sunday. I'm out. Take it easy.